and you've got some great experts here that are going to talk about it in detail and hit different aspects of why the census is so important, but also why it is a racial equity issue, and what that means and the work we're doing here in the county to address it. As was mentioned, I'm Jawando. I'm a council member at large here in Montgomery County, which just means that I represent the whole county. So if you live in Montgomery County, I represent you. And I live in the eastern part of the county. I'm a civil rights attorney by training. I spent a lot of my life working on closing opportunity gaps, working on racial justice and equity, mostly in the areas of education and criminal justice reform, but also workforce development. Worked in the Obama White House and Department of Education, and then on Capitol Hill for Nancy Pelosi and Sherrod Brown, and then Senator Obama. And I am honored to be here today to intro and kind of facilitate this discussion. I did want to mention racial equity more broadly. It's one of these words that you hear a lot, kind of in vogue now, I like to say, but it's really important to talk about what it is and why it's important and what it means. We just have finished a year-long, actually not finished, but started and culminating with the passage of a racial equity and social justice bill here in Montgomery County. The real work is ahead, so that's why I say start. But we were able to take the first step and pass a bill that will allow us to use things like census data and to prepare racial equity statements for every piece of policy that we look at. There's been similar efforts at the state level. Delegate Jazz Lewis, I know, and others, and I'm sure Delegate Wilkins is involved, but to make sure that we embed this, so it's not just individual members of a legislative body that say, hey, I care about equity, I'm going to look at things in an through equitable lens. No, it's part of a system that you're forced to look at things that way. You're forced to look at demographic data and how different policies are going to impact different populations. And I wanted to start there because it's important that when we're talking about the census, that's why we need good data. And if we're going to look at things and say, how is this housing policy going to impact my residents in East County, or how is this zoning change going to impact folks that live in Gaithersburg, and how is this study on health disparities and where we allocate funding and impact, et cetera. The list goes on and on and on. But in order to do this in the right way and to tackle this system we have of hundreds of years of systemic, sanctioned, legal, de facto, de jure discrimination, you have to do it in a systemic way. So I always say systemic challenges, problems require systemic solutions. And in order to get those solutions, you need to have real data. And you need to have funding, right? And so you're going to hear about why those things are connected today. And I just want you to know, on the county council, for our part, working with our state and federal partners, we're going to begin this hard work starting in August of this year. Every bill that we consider will have to have a racial impact statement, right? And so now we're building the capacity so that we can have the right expertise, and I'm very involved in that process so that we can do that. So I wanted to just give you all an update on that. And then I'm going to introduce our panel, and I think we're going to get into the discussion here. And each of our guests are going to have 5 minutes. I think you're going to have one. You have a PowerPoint, and then we'll get into a discussion. This is a good group. I think we have a really good discussion with this size. First, it's my honor to introduce Delegate Jheanelle Wilkins, who is my delegate in District 20 in one of the best districts. I don't want to get into the battle of the districts. Well, you're the only delegate in here, right? So today in this room, District 20, and she's a good friend, and I've known her for a number of years since she moved to the area, and has just dove right in from day one. And she's going to talk to you about what's at stake with the census and her work at the state level. And then you're going to hear from Shawn Ellis, who's going to talk about what's happening here in Montgomery County a bit, and his work around the census and how you can get involved, because this is an important year, as you'll hear. And then Aryani, did I say that right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Who's going to talk more about the federal level and her work and why it's so important there and how this information is used. So we're going to hear from them in that order, about 5 minutes each, and then we'll go into the questions. So we'll start with Delegate Wilkins.
All right, thank you. Hello everyone, how's it going? Having a good day so far? Good. I am just so excited to see this room filled. I wasn't sure because it's so late in the day, but the importance of the census is really shown by this turnout. Again, I'm Jheanelle Wilkins. I'm a state delegate representing District 20 in the Maryland House of Delegates. I am the parliamentarian of the House and serve on the Ways and Means Committee, where we deal with education, election law, taxes, and other really important issues. I also serve on the statewide Census Complete Count Committee, which is a statewide committee that has been put together to help ensure that the state has a strong plan to get out the count in every single corner and make sure that every Marylander counts. Why do we care so much about this? The 2020 census is now upon us. In 47 days, the response period will start. That means we have almost no time left to make sure that every single person is counted. And we have a lot at stake in this count. There's actually $16 billion that Maryland receives in federal funding from various programs via the 2020 census. And so let me break that down just a little bit. That's $6 billion from Medicaid, okay? Making sure that people have access to health care. That's $1 billion for SNAP around nutrition, food assistance. $70 million for our school breakfast program to make sure that our kids are able to eat. $161 million that's for affordable housing programs. And there's a couple of programs that are funded through the 2020 census. There are actually 55 different programs that Maryland receives funding for that have to do with census data. So imagine for us, when we have $70 million at stake when it comes to the school breakfast program, imagine what happens when some kids are not counted. When a parent fills out the form, maybe they just leave their kids off, or they don't fill out the form at all. It is literal dollars that are distributed to our state based on what we tell them our count is. So this is really, really critical for us. We can actually estimate that a little over $18,000 is missed over 10 years per person that's not counted. $18,000 in our community that's missed from those federal funds. And it's not just at the federal level. Right now, as a state on the committee, I mentioned I serve on the Ways and Means Committee, and we deal with education issues. And right now, we're redoing our school funding formula. And so one of the ways that money is distributed to Montgomery County is when we put this formula together, we use that data to look at how many parents, how many children. Census data is just so critical, and that's why it's so important that we make sure every single person is counted. Then we think about our political representation. In 2021, after the census is all said and done, and once the state gets the data from the federal government around our count, we will start to redistrict. We'll redraw our lines. So what that means is that some people that I represent in District 20 right now, maybe I won't represent them anymore when we redraw our lines. That's why it's so important to make sure that you're visible when we are redistricting, that you're visible in the census, because you would literally be missing when you redraw our lines. So the last couple things that I want to mention is something that's critical as we talk about race and equity in the 2020 census is that there are communities that are historically undercounted. People of color, low-income communities, children under 5 years old. Very important. Children under 5 years old are highly undercounted, and immigrant communities are highly undercounted. So we want to make sure that we really target our strategies and our time. Again, we don't have a lot of time, so it makes the most sense for us to target and really be focused in on those communities. The last part of my remarks is actually audience participation. So are you guys ready? Yes. All right, I have a little pop quiz for you guys, okay? And you can just share, you can just think of the answer in your head or write it down and see how you do. 47 days until the 2020 census. Okay, when will the Census Bureau mail information out to respond to the 2020 census? Here are your options. March 12th, April 1st, or April 15th.
March 12th.
Okay, I'm hearing some March 12th. I'm hearing some April 1st. March 12th, good job. All right, that is when the Census Bureau will begin to mail out information to respond to the 2020 census. Next question, how can people respond to the 2020 census? Okay, by mail, by phone, online, using social media, We're using text message. How can people respond?
The first three.
Online,
Mail
by mail,
and phone.
online, by mail, over the phone. Great job. You guys, okay, you guys know this stuff. Okay, 2 quick ones. These are true or false. Should children under 5 be counted in this 2020 census? Yes. All right, great job.
Education.
Yes. True. Good job. True or false? Census data is protected and confidential.
Yes.
True. All right. Under Title 13 of the U.S. Code, it protects census data. It cannot be identifiable. Once you fill in your information, it's kind of blurred up. It's for statistical purposes. So your personal data is not, under federal law, allowed to be shared with anyone. So those are important things to know. You guys did a great job. That you passed the test. Thank you.
To scare people.
Yes, we do. I'm going to turn it over to Shawn. I want to mention, so Delegate Wilkins mentioned people of color, immigrants, children under 5, right? One of the groups most at risk for being undercounted. And I'm sure, Shawn, you're going to talk about the communities in Montgomery County, so I won't mention those. But if you think about who Montgomery County is right now, and we go around talking about 4 of the top 10 most diverse cities in the United States are in Montgomery County, which is true. Rockville, Gaithersburg, Germantown, Silver Spring. It's a great thing. Up there with Chicago and New York and Houston. I mean, we are on the top 10 list, and it's a beautiful thing. A lot of good food because of it. But within that, you also hear a third of our residents are immigrants. So 1/3 of the 1.1 million people born in another country, if you add their kids, like Jheanelle and I, you get up to 45% of Montgomery County, which are either immigrant or first generation. All right, so again, another population that's undercounted. Montgomery County, traditionally a wealthier, mostly white suburb, 40, 50 years ago. Now, majority people of color, and in the growing population, so people with kids under 5 are our communities of color. So we're at risk. So the Montgomery County of today is at risk of being undercounted. I just think that underscores what she was saying. So I know Shawn's going to get a little more detail with that. So Shawn, kick it to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. A lot of you have seen my face before and probably heard some of the spiel before, so I apologize, but I'm going to give it again, okay? So my name is Shawn Ellis. I'm the 2020 Census Manager for Montgomery County. I work out of Montgomery County's Office of Community Partnerships. The reason we're actually leading this effort this time around is because back in 2008, 2009, we were tasked with the responsibility led by Bruce Adams, our director at the time. Because of his work and the work of our partners at that time, we had a response rate or self-response rate of just over 81%. So that's pretty good, right? Put that in context. The national average is 74%. So that is a win. Now, when we talk about census, especially in Montgomery County, I feel like we need to contextualize it. So everything you heard from Will just now, I want to add a little bit to that. So think of it this way. Montgomery County is a very, very special place to live. We all know that because we all live here. 33% of our residents are foreign born or immigrants. We have about 50% of the state's immigrant population, right? At last estimate, approximately 159 languages were spoken on the campuses of Montgomery College, right? About 40% of the households in Montgomery County are renters. So those households are renting, okay?
What was that?
Renting, 40% of the households in Montgomery County are renting, okay? We still have a significant rural population to the west, to the northwest, right? So what does that mean for us? We're not only culturally and linguistically diverse, we have a diversity of how people are living in this country, in this county. It just so happens those are the same things that correlate those communities that are disproportionately undercounted every 10 years. That's what we're facing, okay? Now, let's talk about how this census is going to be a little different. As you've heard, for the first time ever, our residents will have the opportunity to respond online. That should make it more convenient for the vast majority of us, right? But let's step back for a second. Who made it not be more convenient for you?
They don't have computers at home. Yeah.
So, what about our senior population? Those who are technologically less competent or comfortable.
More challenged.
More challenged, right? What about the thought that 3.4% of our residents don't have access to a computer or smartphone? 7.1% of our residents don't have internet connection at home. So this isn't going to be necessarily more convenient for those people, right? It's not that it's impossible. The task is on us, my office and our partners, to provide information as to how these communities can respond. So they can still go online, they can still do it through the mail. Okay? Libraries are a resource. Our faith communities have been gracious enough to open their doors at some of these locations and service partners like that. So it is still possible, but it's incumbent on us and our partners to provide that information. Secondly, because it's online, the reality is the U.S. Census Bureau will not be resourcing this effort the way they have in the past. That's just a fact. What that means is we as Montgomery County need to fill in those gaps in terms of outreach. And it's not just us, it is Arlington, it is Prince George's County, it is the District of Columbia, it is Baltimore County, it is the City of Baltimore. We're all doing this work because the gaps exist, and it's up to us to ensure that our residents are counted in 2020. Okay? Lastly, the reality is we exist in a different political climate. Right? The attempt to add the citizenship question to this census obviously was done to suppress the response rate of our immigrant community. And if we go back to the reality that we have 30% of our residents are immigrants, who does that affect? It affects us. That's just the reality. So, this is what we're doing here in Montgomery County. We are actively recruiting partners to help us in this effort, from our faith communities, from our nonprofit communities, from our business communities, to help us promote the census. Not just promote when it is, how they can do it, but why it's important. Half of this is explaining to folks why it should matter to them. So you heard National School Lunch Program. When I have conversations, when we're training volunteers, it's really important to express or be able to convey to the person sitting in front of you why it should matter to them. So what I say all the time is, well, okay, did you attend public schools in Montgomery County? Do you have any friends, or do you know anybody who's on free lunch? Do you have kids who are on free lunch? If you do, and most of us do know somebody who benefits from free lunch, then you understand this matters to people you know, if not you. That personalizes the message, right? So that's what we're doing. So we invite any organization who's interested in helping us with this work to go to montgomerykountymd.gov/census and sign up to become a 2020 census partner. If you're from the faith community, we're inviting you. I can't tell you how much we need your help, because you are the trusted voices in your community most often, right? So the idea is March 27th through 29th, we're having a census worship weekend where we're inviting our faith community to present census information, build it into your sermon or into your message for that weekend, and promote the census that way. Invite members from my office or from the U.S. Census Bureau to conduct info sessions if possible, right? And then lastly, the census starts officially March 12th, but Census Day is April 1st. Think about or consider opening up your doors somewhere in that period for your residents, members of your community, to fill out the census in a safe location. That just means you have to share your Wi-Fi. We'll provide all the materials you need. The Census Bureau is gracious enough to offer us staff to help us on those days. It's not a huge ask, but it's a significant ask. Hopefully I can answer any more questions you have as we go on. This is really difficult for me to build all this into 5 minutes, so I apologize.
We're gonna have more time. We're gonna have more time. This is just opening statement.
Yeah.
I have questions for you, and the audience, I'm sure, has questions. Thank you very much. Let's give Shawn a round of applause. We're gonna get your projector. Do you want to stand here and do it, or do you?
Because I have to advance it.
Okay.
Yeah, unless there's a quicker.
Let me get out of your
Yeah,
way.
thank you. Hi, I'm Aryani and I'm also a civil rights attorney, and I've been working on Asian American issues for the past 30 years. I work with all the major national leading Asian American organizations in Washington, D.C. So what I wanted to do today is talk to you about national efforts by civil rights organizations on census policy and implementation. And the one takeaway I hope that you'll get after this 5 minutes is that there are civil rights organizations that are working in coalition for you. And if you want to support them, there's a few of them listed here. But at the end of the presentation, it's all about November and elections. Because as you'll see, there's a lot of very key decisions that are being made at the top.
So glad you did the homelessness, because we have a population as well as mental illness that are undercounted.
Yes, thank you. So the key perspective by the civil rights organizations are, are governments providing their programs and services in a fair and equitable manner? And are they enforcing the anti-discrimination laws? Now, data is the keystone for all policy making and advocacy, which is why these organizations are honed in on it. There are 4 strategies that the organizations have used to ensure 2 things. And one is a high response rate, and the second is an accurate and complete census count. So those 4 strategies are advocacy, litigation, community education, and outreach. And so I'm going to circle back and I'm going to talk about highlights under advocacy, which was alluded by Shawn. That's the race and ethnicity, the citizenship question under litigation, and also the proposed changes to the race and ethnicity questioning. So currently, on the census form, you can choose one of 5 race categories and 2 ethnicity categories. And so to improve the response and accuracy rate, the Census Bureau staff has been hard at work for years doing research and testing into field to see how they could reformat the questions so that it would improve both the response and accuracy. So currently, the census on race and ethnicity questions look like this. There's 2 separate questions. The first question up in the top under number 8, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, some of you can't. So I'll tell you, it's just, the first question relates to Hispanic, Latino, and Spanish origin. And then there's some check marks related to ethnicity. The second question asks you to choose one of 5 races. Okay, so they're separated. The proposed form would combine them into one list. Okay, so you would have both the race, the 5 racial categories, and Hispanic, Latino, and Spanish origin. To lay over that, there's also a write-in option. If you see the white boxes underneath each of those check boxes, that allows you to specify what ethnicity that you self-identify. Okay, and so this is one of the changes. I also want to point out that what it does is clarify, if you see the small check boxes at the bottom, there are a number of check boxes for Asian ethnicities, but in fact, Asian is one race category, and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander is another race category. But here it's listed sort of as a smattering of check boxes. If you look at the proposed form, what it does is it separates it out. So there's a checkbox for Asian, and you can indicate ethnicity, whether that's Chinese or Filipino, Asian, Indian. There's a separate one for Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, and you can indicate Native Hawaiian, Samoan, Chamorro, etc. This is a big deal for the Asian American Pacific Islander community because Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders are often so statistically small that they've been overlooked. The last change has to do, for the first time in a very long time, there was a proposal to add the Middle Easterners and North African category as a race category. So, and similarly, it would have allowed a white box for a census taker to specify their ethnicity. So the end result is the Bureau issued a report, analysis report, and it made recommendations to implement these changes. It was started under the previous administration. Under the current administration, those proposed changes were rejected. Okay. In an ironic twist, however, at the 11th hour, the Department of Commerce Secretary proposed a new change, which was the citizenship question, which Shawn had alluded to. And this despite the fact that the Bureau staff had recommended against it. They understood, based on their survey respondents, that 25% of those respondents were fearful about what the Bureau or the government overall would do with that information. And in fact, estimates show that it would have depressed the vote, and in particular the Latino vote, by 5%. So in response, there was 17 states and about 6 cities, including Maryland, that filed a lawsuit. Additionally, there were a whole slew of civil rights organizations like the NAACP who also filed suit. Last summer, the Supreme Court did decide that putting the citizenship question on the census was constitutional. However, the way that they made the decision effectively blocked putting that on the 2020 census. The justice also, in the opinion, wrote that for all intents and purposes, the Department of Commerce Secretary lied as to the reason why he wanted to have that citizenship question included. Okay. I mentioned community education and outreach. There are a number of other issues that behind the scenes, civil rights organizations have been hard at work with the U.S. Census Bureau doing their own focus groups. For example, doing community education, providing bilingual materials. There are many websites. There are several organizations with websites. If you're interested, you can come to me. I can let you know where they are. And they have them in language. So for example, if you're a native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, there are people who are speaking in those languages in order to let people know about the census. There was a focus group that showed that 50% of Asian Americans and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders didn't even know about the census at all. Mistrust of government is a really big issue. This is a live issue even in Montgomery County, but currently among the Chinese immigrant population, there is a concern about participating in the census because in the 2000s, it was learned that the Census data was used to incarcerate Japanese Americans during World War II. And so while it was legal at that time, it's not legal now. There are very strong confidentiality laws that would prohibit something like that, but as you can imagine, that doesn't provide a whole lot of assurances. And in addition to that, there is a nationwide law enforcement campaign that has ensnared hundreds of Chinese Americans based on suspicions that they have these ties to China because of the U.S.-China conflict. So those two in combinations have made people very fearful. Want to stop there and we can talk a little bit about outreach more during the Q&A. Just wanted to throw that up there. Census fraud, there's some resources for you and hotlines that you can call. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. Right, so we have the right people here today. I'm going to ask a few just starter questions, and then just if you guys start thinking about your questions. Look, good thing is everyone kept their time, so we have plenty of time for audience participation. I did want to mention, well, I just want to flag, I'm going to go to you first, Shawn, and I'm going to tee up. If you could also, in your answer to this, talk about the specific communities in Montgomery County that were undercounted, and I have the list. I'm sure you know it by heart. But so the first question for you: what's been the most surprising thing that you've encountered with preparation for the county as large as ours, as diverse as ours, and then some of the biggest challenges, and if you can embed in that the challenges in certain communities in Montgomery County that have historically been undercounted?
All right, that's a really interesting question. So if I'm giving thought to challenges, it's just how many people just don't know what the census is or what it affects or why it's important generally. Going into this process, my assumption was the biggest concern was going to be addressing fears. And to be honest with you, that is a huge issue, but for a lot of our communities, they need to know what the census is first. in order to be afraid of it. So that has been the biggest surprise for me personally. I've spent probably just about every weekend since August somewhere. That doesn't include the weekdays because I'm out in the weeks as well. In terms of our hard to count communities, so we look at it two different ways. We have general regions and then we have individual census tracts, blocks, right? So if you think about blocks in no necessary order, they consist of Long Branch. You guys familiar with Long Branch? So if you think about what's that, Piney Branch Road between Flower Avenue and New Hampshire Avenue. There's another Long Branch community that sits on New Hampshire Avenue just before you get to 495. Glenmont borders Randolph Road, Georgia Avenue. There are 2 census tracts in Aspen Hill. If you guys are familiar with Aspen Hill, you know who sits and lives in Aspen Hill, so it may not be a surprise to you. In Rockville, people might be surprised, there's a census tract in Rockville. It sits right there on Twin Brook. 99% of the home people living in that census tract are renting. 99. Okay. Montgomery Village. There's a census tract right below Montgomery Village, right off of 355. And there are 2 in Germantown. So notice I didn't say anything about Potomac, Bethesda, Kensington, Chevy Chase. That doesn't mean that we can't or can't ignore those communities, right? Census is important for all of our communities to respond to. It just means that those communities historically aren't undercounted. So when I'm developing strategies for outreach, my focus, my real focus is around Wheaton, Long Branch, Montgomery Village, Aspen Hill, Germantown. And arguments can be made that I should be paying as much attention to Clarksburg and Damascus because of those are developing communities and may not have internet access that other communities have. So when we talk about hard to count, and let me be clear here, because if I don't say this, Diane Boo, who is our director, will yell at me. We don't like to use the terminology hard to count because it implies that it's their fault. Right? So really, hard to count, the onus is on us. We either haven't effectively found a way to communicate this information to them, or we're just not doing a good enough job.
Thank you, Shawn, that's important. And along with the hard to count, let's get rid of that. Let's throw that away. Throw it away. Undercounted. Okay. Let's also throw away achievement gap. Let's say opportunity gap. And let's also throw away minority, in my opinion, and let's say communities of color. But those are just suggestions. You're welcome to do them or not. So this is to Jheanelle, and the reason I wanted to back in and start with Shawn. You mentioned some of those communities. I grew up in Long Branch, represents Long Branch. Many of those communities are communities of color, high immigrant communities. So if you could talk about, Delegate Wilkins, why it's particularly important for people of color to be counted. You talked about all the things this money means to those communities. And just with the frame that in 2010, nationwide, 800,000 African Americans were not counted. 800,000. Right? And so could you just talk about why that's just so critical? You can expand on that.
Yes, so I mentioned some of the programs that are so critical where the state gets resources and they're distributed within the state. And for many of those programs, it's communities of color oftentimes that really benefit from them. But if we're not counted, we're not getting all of the dollars that we should get to make sure that everyone's able to benefit. I think of myself. I had free and reduced lunch. I was on Medicaid for a time period. And so being counted and being part of the decision making when it comes to those resources coming to our community is so, so important. And because we're still in a time where there's a lot of racial inequity and financial inequity, it tends to be that communities of color benefit from some of these programs. But the programs are also things like our roads, their school construction. There are a bunch of different ways that the census data is used that don't only benefit people who need various government services, but they benefit all of us. So I think that's something that's really important. In addition to that, again, the political representation. As someone who's going to play a part in drawing our districts, and as the first Black woman to represent my district, right? And that's it starting in 2018. We had never elected any Black women at all in Montgomery County at the state level to represent us. So when we're looking to draw our districts, what happens when you draw districts is that your districts also determine who is going to be representing you. And so we try to keep communities together who share particular characteristics. We try to make sure the districts are as fair as possible. So when you're literally invisible when we're drawing that district, I can't even see you to advocate that this community, stay intact and that our political representation is fair. And we know the history of voting rights in the United States. We know the history of gerrymandering, how it's impacted people of color, and how important political representation is and having these seats at the table. So that's why in particular for communities of color who utilize various resources, and as we build our political power to reflect our numbers in Montgomery County, it's so important to make sure that we are counted and that we are visible.
Thank you, Delegate Wilkins. And you brought up a very important point. People are relying on this. Businesses use this to decide whether they're going to locate, right? We make decisions on, planners make decisions on where we're going to put a road. And so it's really basic things that aren't just programs to help people. It's basic infrastructure that relies on this information. Aryani, turning to you for a second, could you talk about, you mentioned this a little bit, the importance of the data collection. Obviously the census we know from the programmatic standpoint and the political representation standpoint, but why just for the Asian American community in particular, the data collection piece is just so important. And what are the challenges, some of the additional challenges, you mentioned a few, to outreach to that community, and you can expand on that if you want.
Okay. So I think what is true for the Asian American Pacific Islander community is true for several underrepresented groups. We may be statistically small. It doesn't mean we're irrelevant, right? And so data is extremely important for two reasons. One is that it affords us, one, visibility, and two, it reveals the socioeconomic needs of all the ethnic communities. So just to let you know, even though Asian Americans have been in this country since the 1800s, there have been major waves of which the majority of people have come. And this is after 1965. My parents came in that wave. At the time I was born, our population was about 1.8 million. And now it's 20 million. Okay, and then there was another wave after the 1980s. So as a result, 59% of our population are first generation immigrants. They were born in other countries. And if you looked only at the adults, it would be 73%. So they're immigrants. They're limited English proficient. There's a significant numbers. So they really fall under a lot of those undercount categories that we're concerned about. And that's why you have, the civil rights organizations, the Asian Americans working and filing lawsuits alongside, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, or NALEO, or NAACP. That's why we have a presence there. I think even in Montgomery County, the thing that we come up against over and over again is that Asian Americans are not even named in the statistical graphs. We're the other. Or we're not disaggregated out. We're just Asian. So I can tell you that Asian American Pacific Islander is a political construct. Okay, there are different ethnic communities who, because we were so small, came together for political lobbying purposes. But that doesn't mean that we want to be seen as an aggregate necessarily. Okay, and there are people who will oppose that, but on the national level, this had culminated to the point where President Clinton passed an executive order directing federal agencies to collect and disaggregate the data across all federal agencies in recognition that the needs were not necessarily being met by Asian American ethnic communities. Okay, so that's important, how important it was. And I just want to tell a small anecdote about visibility.
Sure.
And I got my start in civil rights because of a hate crime that happened in 1982. And I learned about it pretty contemporaneously to that. And at the time, what was invoked for one of the first times was a federal hate crime law. And at that time, the lawyers at the top civil rights organizations were struggling to see if Asian Americans were even covered under that federal law. Okay, so we came from invisibility to Oriental to, in the 70s, because 77, the definition by the Office in Management and Budget, Asian American, right? So this is still our struggle. So, for those of you who are policy making decisions, I know we're statistically small, but it is so important for us to have that visibility so that we can be recognized and so can our ethnic communities and their needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's such an important point because actually in Montgomery County, you're not statistically small. And now it depends on how you brought up the point of, is it aggregated together as a group, Asian American, Pacific Islander, which there are reasons where that might be beneficial. And I know there are groups that come together. We have Democratic clubs and other things but obviously a lot of diversity within. Chinese American being probably one of the larger, and then South Asian, Indian American, you have a large population, and everything in between. But if you take Asian American, Pacific Islanders as a group in Montgomery County, and Shawn could correct me, it's over 12%, of the population. So it's not as small as it is nationally. And like much of Montgomery County, we're very segregated, and we have many of our populations concentrated. So, but I often say in Montgomery County, any given day on the week, you can go to a hall or a party or something and get like 1,000 of whatever you want. 1,000 Chinese Americans, 1,000 Nigerian Americans, 500 Jamaicans. You can find, and though that's where we need to be. And I've been a constant advocate on the council. Like, look, it's nice to have our meetings and ask people to come to us, but we've got to get in those rooms because they are happening every night. And that's where we need to drive home not only the census message, but get people engaged just more broadly. I want to turn to the audience now. And yes, you're going to go first. You're going to go first. I know you're ready. And if you could just have a question and state the question, and then whoever wants to respond from the panel can respond. So go ahead.
So how are y'all going to deal with people dealing with mental illness and homelessness and couch surfing? Because there's a whole young adult population, there's an old adult population, and there are a lot of people with disabilities that don't have a permanent home and address.
That's a really good question. We have two answers to that. So,
by the way, I'm president of On Our Own of Montgomery County, which is an advocacy group for people dealing with mental illness and substance abuse.
okay.
Pressure's on.
I know. That's a really good question. So let me answer it in reverse. The couch surfing piece, right? For that, it's been about the education of our residents. So the idea of what a household is has been a key piece to our training for our volunteers. And when I have these conversations and do info sessions wherever I go, one of my main focus points is household, and that means everybody under that roof, whether you are renting out a basement to another family, whether that is your grandmother who comes to visit you from Barbados or Nigeria or Trinidad, wherever, if she's there for the majority of the year or 6 months out of the year and she's there on April 1st, she needs to be included on your census. If your nephew is couch surfing because he got in an argument with his uncle dad, he needs to be included on that census. So it's about the education piece, right? So that's the couch surfing piece. For the homeless, listen, the reality is we're gonna have to partner with our service providers to get an idea of where these people are, what services they're using, and provide that information to the Census Bureau, because the homeless community is counted through what is called group quota enumeration. So they go to the places where the homeless exist, the food kitchens, the shelters, wherever they are, wherever they're believed to be during a certain period, and they partner with those organizations to count them that way, but they get that information from us.
So, as president of this organization, I had no idea how bad this homelessness issue is, but I am dealing with people that literally don't have a home, and I don't know how to get them the resources to get to a home, because they're either under domestic violence, and then they have those issues of having told
So we can do a direct connection afterwards, follow up. It's a great point. We can talk about that all day. I'm gonna go there, then here, then over here. Yes, ma'am.
Now, my nieces and nephews are mixed parentage. We did Ancestry.com for Christmas. It came back with all different kinds of, oh my goodness gracious. In your opinion, is it advantageous or disadvantageous to select other, or do you recommend that my nieces and nephews pick and choose?
You wanna do that?
I
Maybe
can-
you too. Yeah.
I can start with that. So, and you're saying for when it asks the race or ethnicity?
They know that they're mixed parentage, but Ancestry.com threw a twist on
Okay.
it.
So I think
So
something.
it's even more complicated than we thought.
So something that's very important is that the 2020 census is self-response. And I say that to you because if you are helping someone else and they might say, what should I choose? I'm not sure. It's very important that people are able to identify how they choose to. With that said, for I believe the first time you saw the example of the census form that was put up, you're able to choose. For me, I can choose black, but even more than that, because that's how I identify, but even more than that, I can write in Jamaica. I was born in Kingston, Jamaica, and so I'm able to put not only black but also my go deeper into my identity, my ethnicity. And so for your nieces and nephews and family, they can go ahead and input all of the things that
Is it advantageous or disadvantageous?
I would say, I'm not gonna tell anyone how they should fill it out, but I will say this. When we're redrawing districts, I would like to know if your nieces and nephews are like a person of color or a marginalized community, again, for the purposes of how we draw our districts, I would like to know that information. Other doesn't really tell me as much, so I would really like to know if that person identifies as black. I would prefer to have that.
Yeah.
So.
You okay?
No.
No, again, and I think to that point, again, they need to do what they feel, but from a sociological perspective, how when I walk out, I can think I'm whatever, but people gonna say I'm black, right? So I just think there is something to be said for that, but you can give them the guidance that they have. And I think it was this young lady here, and then in the back, and then I'm gonna come over to this room because I've been looking right. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
How do people who are like incarcerated, how do they fill this out? Like the census?
Great question.
How's that work?
So my understanding is that there's some concerns about where the incarcerated are going to fill out the census, because then the counties where the facility is would be accorded more resources. And so, but as far as the implementation of that, I'm going to defer to my.
So that's another group quarters for prisons. The U.S. Census Bureau will connect directly with our Department of Prisons in Maryland and get their account from there. But the really important part that Aryani was getting to is that in Maryland we have something unique where we've taken a stand against prison gerrymandering, which is when for all of those resources where a prison is located in the past, that communities, let's say Jessup, Maryland, would get a lot of resources because they have a prison there. What we do in Maryland, ever since the last census, we said, hold on, that's not right. So now, for the purposes of redistricting and certain funds for certain particular state resources, those inmates will be counted where at their last address. So we're gonna do an entire process to figure out where they last were.
Which is important for political representation too.
Yeah.
You were next, then you, and then we're going over here. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Is
As long as we can.
is anyone concerned about fraud associated with the census, like crooks sending out fake forms to fish for personal information?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's a huge concern. The 4 things you guys should know. Census Bureau is never gonna ask you for your social security number. They're never gonna ask you for your political affiliation. They're never gonna ask you for a donation. If you see that, it's a problem, you need to report it. It's just the facts. The only time the Census Bureau is gonna ask for your social security number is if you're applying for a job through the website, right? But the reality is, it's already happening. If you Google census jobs, the first 10 things that come up are fraud. So if you know someone who's applying for a job, they need to go and type in 2020 census.gov/jobs. It was a huge concern with the Census Bureau when we met with them over the summer, because I asked for information about, so this invitation is going to come out in March. What does it look like? I need to tell my folks what to expect, what number to look for, what insignia to look for. They're like, I can't tell you that, because people are going to use that information to fish. So it's been a huge concern.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, hi, my name is Julie Yang. Thank you for all your work, Alice, that you have provided the ambassador training, which is very helpful, that Aryani have provided information to address Asian American concerns. Now, I want some practical advice. So if a citizen or if a resident is worried about the confidentiality of the census, especially under the racial category, what are some things they can do? What if they skip that question? If within that question, if they pick, they're not comfortable picking like Asian American due to the history, what happened in history, then what would your suggestion? Because I hear that, data is a visibility. So what are your suggestions for them to do?
You want to go first and I'll go next?
You can go ahead.
So that's a really good question. A, you need to tell any resident filling out the census, if they leave a question blank, they're very likely to get follow-up. And a lot of our immigrant communities don't want someone to knock on their door. So you need to take that into consideration. B, to be honest with you, when I'm having these conversations, it's important for me to, so there are going to be concerns, but I need to stress why it's beneficial to them to provide that information, because I'm not going to be able to quell all the concerns they have about confidentiality. I can state Title 13 in the law, but if you have that concern and you know the history of this country and you think about what the current president is trying to do, I'm not going to quell every concern you have. What I can tell you is there are any number of reasons why this should matter to you, and your community. One thing that was mentioned earlier, and I want to talk about really quickly because it was mentioned, but the self-identification piece of the census is huge. So back in February, Diane, our director, tasked me with the responsibility of looking up the Caribbean American community in this county and the Middle Eastern community in this county. That data did not exist. So when we talk about representation or being able to provide services in a culturally and linguistically appropriate way, how are we doing that if we don't know who they are and where they exist? So to me, it's about being able to come to Will and talk to him about why your community needs these resources and why it's important to have it in a culturally, appropriate way. You can't do it effectively without that data.
I have a follow-up. So Julie, the Census Bureau cannot give the information to law enforcement, to ICE, Department of Homeland, or the IRS. So maybe that's like a simple, piece of advice that you can give them. And also, there are penalties for employees who disclose personally identifiable information. And the laws are now so strict that even if they're public information, the Census Bureau has been discouraged from even sharing that upon request by the federal agencies.
That's a good point. And we're gonna go over here. I always say squeaky wheel gets the oil. Like competition, like do you want, if you make noise by filling this out or speaking out, you're gonna get more in your community. I think that's like a baseline thing we need to just emphasize in the midst of all the fear, I think it was here and then there. Yes.
Thank you. How are college students counted?
So similarly, if there's a slight difference. So the question, if you didn't hear, is how are college students counted? So similarly, group quarters, where the university will work with the U.S. Census Bureau and the state to account for how many students are on their campus. When it gets to off-campus housing, that's when it gets a little bit tricky. So most students who are off-campus will receive it goes to every household. So their household will receive a form. So those students should count themselves there at that location. There's something that I think is really helpful there. I know there are a lot of unique circumstances that people are in. The Census Bureau, if you go online, has this really great how to be counted form that goes through all of these. So if you're a college student, prisons, foster students who are, or kids who are in foster care, it has a lot of unique circumstances. I find it really helpful to look through. So I would suggest, if you're helping people and you want to make sure that you just have that information, they have a great fact sheet on how to count these specific communities. So I definitely recommend it.
Thank you.
And I'll just say real quick on that, undercounted versus overcounted. I'm of the opinion in these, particularly in undercounted communities, the communities that are overcounted tend to be the ones that have the more access and more affluence, right? So the white community, for example, tends to be overcounted. So you need to be counted wherever you are, is what I would say. Like, and if it happens twice, that's not official census policy.
Just edit that out.
Shawn just suggested that if you're counted twice, the census has a way of figuring out.
Right.
So it's still safe.
Again, exactly.
But my real question is about the online versus the paper. So we deal with a lot of seniors and immigrants who may or may not be comfortable with the computer, and my understanding is that when we help, if we help, or we have somebody come out, we can't actually answer the questions. When will paper come out? How will paper come out? And is there a way to ask for a bunch of paper census forms so that we can have people
Okay, so great question. The paper form will be sent to every household who has not responded by that fourth reminder. We talked about the reminder today?
No, we haven't.
So sorry, let's back up a little bit. So you're gonna get, every household in this country is going to get an invitation. Let's just say 95% of the households in this country will get an invitation starting on March 12th, okay? After that, every household will get a reminder postcard, okay? Subsequent to that, there will be 3 more reminder postcards. With the 4th reminder postcard, every household who has not responded at that point will get the paper questionnaire.
Yes.
So if you don't respond by end of April, I think the first date is April 20th or something like that, you will get the paper questionnaire. Now, to address the second part of that question is, we are told that if you go to the phone number that is included on the invitation, you should be able to request paper questionnaire be sent to your household. Just one. I personally, and I don't work for the Census Bureau, but I personally have some concerns about the reality of them actually sending a paper questionnaire to every household. Because they're gonna send it anyway if you haven't responded, and my thought is, the likelihood is they're just gonna wait.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on that. They can call, they don't wanna go online. You get a unique code in the mail, and that's what you will use that code to go online and fill out your information. Or you can get on the phone. If you don't feel comfortable going online, there'll be a phone number to call that you get in your mailing as well. So I'd recommend that person either use the phone option or wait for the 4th mail.
So the code in the mail, is that in a sealed envelope? Okay.
So the first invitation, we understand, is going to be a letter describing the census, what it is, with the phone number, with the geocode. Also understand that one of the benefits of either doing it online or over the phone is that you get language assistance in 12 languages. So you can do it in your language if it's one of those 12, over the phone or online. If you wait for the paper questionnaire, it's only in English and Spanish. Okay?
So I think we're out of time, so let's give our panel and everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.